There's something about roadside motels that has always made me uneasy. Maybe it's the bitter coffee in the lobby, or how the walls seem to hum just a little louder than they should. Maybe it's the faded artwork on the walls. Those blurry prints of landscapes that feel fake and framed in dusty wood older than the building itself. I don't know what it is, but something about them just gives me the willies. I was supposed to be back in Des Moines that night, but around 8 o'clock, a storm hit hard. Sheets of rain and lightning that lit up the sky every few seconds. The wind so loud I had to turn the radio off. Then my GPS froze and the roads were starting to flood. Through the rain, I saw a neon sign glowing in the distance. It read Lincoln Inn. It looked half abandoned, like one of those places where you keep your shoes on, but I didn't have many options. The lobby was dark and quiet. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners. And behind the desk sat a girl about my age. Her name tag said Kelsey. She didn't look up from her phone when I walked in. I asked for a room. She just slid a keycard toward me and said, "You're in 210, upstairs." She did not ask for an ID or even make eye contact. That should have been the first red flag. When I got upstairs, the hallway smelled like wet carpet and old paint. As I passed room 209, I noticed the light above. It was flickering. The number plate on the door looked brand new, like it had been replaced recently. I thought I heard something from behind the door. It sounded like a dull thump, then a long scraping sound, like a chair being dragged across the floor. I kept walking. I figured someone was just moving around. Room 210 was small but fine. It had one bed and a heater that clicked when it turned on. The storm outside sounded like it was tearing through the parking lot. I kicked off my shoes and laid down under the thin blanket. I started to drift off when I heard it again, a thump and then a slow drag across the floor. I sat up and checked the clock. It was just after midnight. I put my ear to the wall. I heard crying that would stop for a few seconds, then start again. In between the crying, I heard whispering. It was too soft to make out. I pulled out my phone and recorded it. Just a short clip. You can hear the dragging sound. And right at the end, a whisper. It creeped me out. I threw on a hoodie and went downstairs to talk to the front desk. Kelsey was still there and still scrolling on her phone. But when I spoke, she looked up like I had pulled her out of a dream. I said, "Someone's in room 209, right? I've been hearing furniture moving and crying. It's been going on for over an hour." She just stared at me. Then she said, "No one's in 209. I told her that wasn't possible and that I'd heard them." She pulled out a clipboard with a night's room list. My room was on there, so were two others, but room 209 was empty. She told me it had been empty for over 2 weeks. I then pulled out my phone and played her the recording. She listened and her face went pale. Then she stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and asked me to wait in the lobby. In the lobby, I sat in a cracked leather chair, watching the rain smear across the lobby window. At the front desk was a small security monitor showing the upstairs hallway. I could see room 209. Its door was closed. There was no movement, but then the screen glitched. When it came back on, the door to 209 was wide open, but no one had gone in and no one came out. It was just open. Kelsey came back a few minutes later, looking shaken. She said the room was empty, but the bed was unmade, and the bathroom door had scratches on the inside, like someone had tried to claw their way out. That was enough for me. I packed up and left before sunrise. A few days later, I opened the audio file again on my laptop. I wanted to hear the whisper more clearly. I boosted the volume and ran a filter to isolate the sound. That's when I heard it. A voice. It was my voice whispering, "Help me. I'm still in here." But I never said that. Not during the recording. Not ever. but somehow it was me, coming from a room I never entered. I was on my way to photograph an old steel mill just outside of Rapid City. It was part of a solo photo series I was working on. You know, just documenting abandoned places, things like that. No crew, just me, my camera gear, and miles of empty highway. Normally, I liked those drives. They gave me space to think. But something about that day felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the clouds sank low over the horizon. Or maybe it was how the daylight seemed to disappear earlier than usual. By the time I realized, I was farther from the steel mill than I thought. It was around 6:45 p.m. My gas was running low, and my GPS had stopped tracking a while back. So when I saw a rusted sign on the side of the road that read, Mayfield Lodge, 3 miles ahead, I was relieved. About 10 minutes later, I found the turnoff. A narrow, cracked road lead to an old, sagging building that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. The sign out front said vacancy. There were a few cars in the parking lot, all of them old. Nothing newer than maybe 2005. I parked next to a dusty red Chevy and headed inside. The lobby smelled like damp wood and old books. Behind the front desk stood a man wearing a brown cardigan. He looked at me. It felt like I was the first person he'd seen all day. I asked if they had a room. He nodded and said, "Only one left. Room 7. Then he handed me a key. Not a key card, an actual brass key. I looked at it and noticed it said room 9, not 7. I pointed it out. He paused, looked at it, and nodded. He chuckled a little and said, "You're right. Must be a long day." Honestly, it felt like the kind of place where small mistakes were normal, so I didn't ask questions. I was tired. My room was at the far end of the building, tucked behind a dying pine tree. The hallway leading there smelled like mothballs and something metallic. You know, the kind of smell you can almost taste. Room 9 was cold. Not freezing, just cold and still. It was a strange kind of stillness that makes the air feel heavier. The layout was simple. A bed, a small dresser, curtains that didn't quite close all the way. The only light came from an overhead bulb that buzzed constantly. I set down my camera bag and sat on the edge of the bed, and that's when I heard it. It was a faint humming sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the light. But when I listened closer, I realized it was coming from outside. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back. The neon vacancy sign was humming loud enough to vibrate the window glass. Then it lit up. All the letters turned on in a pale green glow. And for just a second, they didn't spell vacancy. They spelled something else. It spelled, "You stay." Then the lights flickered and went dark again. I stood there staring out the window, waiting for it to change again, but it didn't. The sign went back to darkness. That night, I couldn't sleep. The humming sound was louder now, low and steady, like something was alive behind the walls. I thought about leaving, but it was past midnight, and I had no idea how far the next town was. So I laid back down and told myself it was just electrical noise, and eventually I fell asleep. I woke up to 3 slow knocks at the door. I sat up listening. Another knock, but louder this time. Then silence. I didn't move. I just sat there staring at the door. After a while, I walked to it slowly and looked through the peephole. No one was there. But right where the peephole sat, something had been scratched into the wood. The word "stay" in all caps, carved deep, like someone used a nail. I didn't sleep after that. At sunrise, I packed my things and walked down to the lobby. It was empty. No one at the desk. No voices, no bell, nothing. The guest book was still there, still open. I flipped to the last page. Only one name was written in it. It was mine. Below it, someone had added a line in rough handwriting. It said he stayed. Finally, I closed the book and left. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked up at the sign one last time. This time it was glowing, but it didn't say vacancy anymore. It said no vacancy in an ominous green glow. I had been on the road for almost 10 hours. I was scheduled to meet with clients the next morning in St. George, but I knew if I pushed on any further that night, I'd be risking falling asleep at the wheel. So I took the first exit that had a motel that looked even halfway decent. It was one of those chain places that had clearly changed ownership a few times. The neon sign out front still had the original logo, but half the letters were burned out. Inside, the front desk clerk barely acknowledged me. She asked for my ID, handed me a key card, and muttered, "Room 17, around the back." I parked behind the building. The parking lot was almost empty. There was just a beat-up pickup and an older sedan with fogged windows. I didn't mind the quiet. In fact, I welcomed it. Room 117 was exactly what I expected. 2 beds, a flickering lamp, and a strong chemical smell that tells you someone tried hard to cover up something else. I dropped my bag on the nearest bed and sat down to take off my shoes. That was when I realized how dry my throat was. I had forgotten to bring water with me. I checked the bathroom sink first. The faucet sputtered rust for a few seconds before clearing up, but the water tasted sharp, almost metallic. I decided to try the vending area the clerk had mentioned. It was outside, down a long walkway, past a few darkened rooms, tucked beside a stairwell. A single bulb buzzed above the machines, casting a pale circle of light. There was a soda machine, but it was out of order. The ice machine next to it was humming loud enough to vibrate the wall. I stood there for a second, staring at my reflection in the stainless steel. And that was when I saw him. Not in front of me. In the reflection. A man, standing several feet behind me, still and silent. I spun around immediately. But there was no one there. Just the walkway, the ice machine, and the buzzing light. I looked back at the metal surface. He was still there, dressed in a dark jacket. His head was tilted slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I blinked once. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. I backed away slowly, breathing hard. My mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me after a long day behind the wheel. I turned and walked quickly back toward my room. Not running, but just short of it. When I got to room 117, I slid the key card in, and it didn't open. I tried again. Nothing. On the third try, the green light finally clicked. I pushed the door open and froze in the doorway. The bathroom light was on. I had not left it on. I was sure of that. The mirror was fogged up, like someone had just taken a hot shower. But I hadn't even used the bathroom. I stood there gripping the doorknob, staring toward the open door at the end of the room. Then the fan above the shower turned on by itself. The sound was soft, but steady. I pulled out my phone, trying to stay calm. No signal. Not 1 or 2 bars. Nothing. Just the words "no service" across the screen. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my bag and walked straight back to my car. I didn't stop to check out. I didn't even look back. I drove for about an hour through empty highway until I found a gas station that was lit and open. I parked in the far corner, sat there in silence, and finally let myself breathe. When I looked into my rear view mirror, I saw something. Just for a second, standing still, next to the ice machine. He was there, watching me.